Hello, I'm live. My name is Rob, and I'm from that channel Performance Check. Today I'm going live because I wish to talk about a topic that I am quite fond of when it comes to role-playing games and popular culture. The topic is masks and the gimmicks of evil. So that's what I'm going to be talking about. Whilst I let people or give people a chance to join, I'm going to wait around and do that. I'm also going to do a channel update. I also would like to see if comments are working, because last time I went on a stream, the comments didn't come up. And I think that's been happening for a few people lately, so I don't know if live's been going through issues. Jeff Doty has just commented saying, "Howdy, Rob." Fantastic. So comments are working. So I will begin with a channel update. And it's two games that I'm running, both around the weekend. The first one will be the Lawkeepers, which is taking place for you guys in the US. It's going to be Friday night. I think around 8-ish EDT, whatever 2:30 GMT is. Me and Lloyd are having to stay up late for this one, later than usual, but it'll be worth it. I'm going to make sure that it is worth it. But it's Lawkeepers Chapter 11, Into the Nightmare Shrine. It's a session that I'm really looking forward to, because it's an idea that I had that just went, and the session fully formed jumped into my mind. And that doesn't happen all the time. Happens sometimes, but not all the time. So I think myself lucky for that, for this particular session. Very excited about it. And then on the Sunday following, I'm going to be running the second part of Vampire the Masquerade London, my sandbox Vampire the Masquerade campaign, which I'm also really looking forward to. So lots of games happening in and around the weekend for me. Well, I say lots too, but still, that's a lot for the days. Anyway, so that's essentially it for performance check updates. So I'm just going to get right into the topic. Like I said at the top, this is going to be about masks and the gimmicks of evil. So way back in storytelling, masks have always been there. They have been a feature of characterization throughout storytelling for a long time. Generally speaking, masks were there to present people watching or people reading or viewers or whatever the idea that there was mystery to a character, and mostly ill intent. To cover your identity would mean that you have a guilty conscience, perhaps. Thus, the mask has always been sort of a staple of villainous characters for a long time. Now, that changed. That went into, you sort of go into the Avenger kind of territory, with Zorro coming along. He has a mask to protect his identity. That obviously then informs characters like Batman. And then all throughout storytelling, you have the mask that can either mean one thing or another, good and evil, you know. It is something that I'm really fascinated with, generally. I'm sure most of you can think of a villain that wears a mask, or a hero that wears a mask. As I said, there's examples before with Batman and Zorro, but also with villains like Vader, Boba Fett, the Red Hood, Deathstroke. Let me think. I saw some this is all coming from a post that Anastasia made earlier. So Predator was another example given. What else? What else was there? Immortan Joe from Mad Max. So you get my point. That is the history of masks in storytelling. Not obviously comprehensive, but that's where it comes from. And essentially, using a mask for your hero, I think, is a little bit of a shortcut, a little bit of a cheeky trick to use, because by putting a mask on someone, you are instantly and automatically inspiring a mystery that your players are not aware of. They will want to know, well, why? are they wearing a mask? Why are they hiding their face? They'll be interested to know who the person is behind the mask and reasons behind why they're wearing the mask. Is it like Vader, where they have to wear the mask to keep themselves alive and they're horribly scarred beneath? Is it simply to protect their identity? Is it for other nefarious purposes? A character that I played, one of my favorite characters from the 3.5 era of D&D, was called Fade. He was an assassin, and he had a very different reason why he wore the mask, or a number of reasons, actually. One was the obvious for an assassin, the identity protection kind of thing. But as I continued playing the character, I began to realize that the reason that Fade was putting this mask on was not only to obviously hide his identity, but to detach himself from his own actions. He would put on the mask and he would, in essence, feel like he was becoming a different person. To sort of distance himself from the guilt of killing so many people, because he was he got a pretty high level. Like he was a long lasting character. I played him for a long time, and he did a number on a lot of people, which did a lot of things to his brain, as I imagine killing a lot of people might do. And I liked the idea of not only the duality, because obviously there's the obvious thing of the duality, the Batman, Bruce Wayne thing of putting on a mask, and the character's different. But what it means for the person behind the mask is it's kind of like an ambiguity, a freedom. It awards them a freedom that they would not have if they weren't wearing the mask. And I think it's all things like that already that are really inspiring points for the game, for running a game. And cool things about characters. Like, I'm fascinated with them. With the Lawkeepers, Equinox is just another one of a long list of villains that have worn sort of masks, because that's kind of what I tapping into. I want to tap into sort of classic motifs of storytelling. So a masked villain was the way to go for me. I like to think that I made him a little bit different by giving him one eye, but then I realized after I described him in the first session, I looked back and I was like, well, what you've essentially described there, Rob, is a mix of Kylo Ren and Deathstroke mashed into one. So I was like, yeah, it kind of is. Not exactly, he's got like white and black and stuff, but like there's a clear inspiration there. But, I'm okay with that, considering the nature of the campaign, considering it's drawing on all these classic motifs of storytelling, So I've already got quite a few comments, which is nice. I'm glad to see the comments have returned to me. So Kai says here, also says, howdy, Rob. Kai says, outlaws wore a scarf over their mouth, but maybe to protect from breathing dust. There you go. It's another practical method for using a mask. Kaius also says, samurai masks. I completely agree. The samurai had fearsome faces on their masks. I should imagine for intimidation purposes. Another use for a mask. If you see a dude on a hill who cuts through like 6 peasants with a samurai sword, and then he looks over at you and you see this garish, bright red, grinning, demonic mask, you're going to think twice before approaching them. And I mean, you probably think twice about approaching anyone who just cut 6 people down anyway, but the mask awards him sort of like a inhuman kind of persona almost. Which one will work for the samurai because he will feel powerful because people perceive him that way. But obviously it will have the effect of people being really scared of the fact that there's this nutter with a mask cutting people down with a samurai sword. So yeah, that's a really good example, guys. Jeff Doe says, honestly, even aside from the coolness and mystery story factor, it kind of makes sense that if you're going to be up to no good in public, then protecting your identity makes sense. You can continue to live in the light whilst being up to villainous stuff in secret. Yeah. There was a campaign I ran with the primary villain being a Master of Masks, which was a prestige class in 3.5. And the Master of Masks had basically the whole point of it was that they were a craftsman, and they would create these magical masks, each of them bestowing the wearer with a particular skill and a particular identity as well, if they needed to be. So they were just this constantly changing person that could, achieve lots of different things. A jack of all trades, but infused with magical power from these masks. And it was really cool in 3.5. It was a prestige class, like I said, and I decided to have a villain be a master of masks because I thought, well, that's pretty cool because, you're up against someone who can look like anyone. Which was great because then he could make himself look like one of the player characters. He decided to make himself look like Theodrex of Hemlon, one of my player characters. My friend Matt was playing him. For any of those that watched my series Lore Drop on my channel. And he basically took on the image of Theodrex of Hemlon and decided to go about committing crimes, thus framing Theodrex and getting people to put bounties on his head just because he could. Why should he have to fight Theodrex of Hemlon alone when he can have the authorities of the nation after him as well? It was just a really cool way to combat the threats of the player characters, and it makes sense because he's a master of masks. That's what they do. So Jeff also says, that's a good point. A mask can also act as a separate persona. People can become very different when they're no longer directly connected to their real self. Absolutely, Jeff. And I don't want to go into this too much, but the way I look at it is the ambiguity of saying, I don't know, writing on a forum, for example, because you're not there in person, because you're not recognized and attached to your actions and what you're saying, you feel a sense of liberty and a sense of power that you're able to express things that you wouldn't normally if you were there in public. That is another thing that the mask awards, which enables such heroic acts, but also such villainous acts at the same time. Kaya says, how about masks possessing the wearer? Do you mean like the hit 1997 comedy The Mask? I don't know if it was 1997, but I'm thinking of The Mask with Jim Carrey. That's a good idea, though, that the mask, there is kind of like a Loki-esque mask that's possessing folk and achieving its own ends through whoever wears it. That's pretty cool. People come up with a campaign with that as the villain. It's just an inanimate object, or it wouldn't be inanimate. It would, but it'd just be evil. It doesn't matter. Brian Scott Bailey says, running various superhero games, I find players had masks. Yeah, well, that's and it just buys back into the superhero trope, doesn't it? Which is a good trope. I think that side of the storytelling is really, really cool. It's a classic one, who is the person behind the mask, and let's think, like, there's the Vicky Vale, the reporter, and I'm talking about the Batman film at this point, not the comics. I don't know why I'm referencing the Batman film, because I'm not a huge fan of the Burton Batman films. The reporter is kind of like all up and loving Batman, and Bruce Wayne is Batman, and is trying to have a relationship with her. And as far as I can remember, anyway, maybe I'm getting it wrong. Wait, no, that's Batman Forever. It doesn't matter. You get my point. Falling in love with the mask and not the man behind it, because you don't know who the man behind it is, like that. There's kind of like an allure to it, isn't it? The mystery. Brian Scott says, hate, apologies, I shall read that again. Running various superhero games, I find players hate masks. Fair enough. I don't see why. It's a great thing to do for superhero storytelling, in my opinion. Look to over 75 years of Batman storytelling. Look to slightly less of Spider-Man. It works. That's fine if people don't like it. There are plenty of unmasked superheroes as well that are pretty great as well. But anyway, I wanted to talk about masks because I find it really interesting, and I find those things that I've just mentioned interesting to put into role-playing games. I'm going to have a sip of tea, I'm going to have a puff, and then I'm going to talk about gimmicks of evil, and then, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to make a villain on this stream. I've just decided this very second we're going to make one using what I talk about when I talk about gimmicks. Oh, that hit the spot. Have you ever been a character that's worn a mask? Anyone in the chat? I choose to have one at any opportunity. If I can't have a cloak, then I have a mask. There are just some things that I just like having. You know, I don't go into wish fulfillment much with role-playing games. But masks and cloaks, I can't resist. So let's talk about gimmicks. Generally speaking, villains throughout popular culture and storytelling don't necessarily just have masks, but they have gimmicks, things that people remember them by. Captain Hook is one that I can think of off the top of my head. It's an unfortunate name. Let's think of it. Like, I mean, did he have that name before? Captain T. James Hook, I believe his name is. Like, did he have a hook before he was Captain Hook? And it's just like a really, really sad coincidence. But another thing to add to the gimmick of Captain Hook, let's use Captain Hook as an example, is that as villainous and as terrifying as he might be portrayed, he also has one fundamental flaw, which is his abject fear of ticking. He hates the sound of ticking clocks because he thinks it's the crocodile that took his hand. Like, that's just a great little twist. I don't know, it obviously is quite an old one. You know, Peter Pan's been around for quite a while. But this is exactly what I mean. Like, it adds a new dimension. Like, he has a particular thing that you remember him for, the hook, and the reason, you know, why he's scared because of it. Let me think of another one. So Vader, obviously we're talking about masks, but Vader's, I guess, gimmick is the fact that when he, you know, unmistakably is his... I mean, Vader's got a lot, to be fair. Like, and to be, I think it's unfair to actually use him as an example because you could argue Vader is the perfect villain. In my mind, he is. Let me think. I'm just trying to think of another villain with a gimmick. There are plenty out there. I'm just drawing a blank, but you get what I mean. Like, there is something with the Captain Hook example. Then there is something immediately identifiable from him. Like, and I think that it's pretty great to have that for role-playing games because it's something that you can continually make reference to, and it makes your villain memorable, and it makes them, like I say, immediately identifiable. Like, and you don't forget them in a hurry. Obviously, there is a bit more to it than that, but let me tell you, it helps. I would say that giving your villain something like that, you're doing like 80% of the work in terms of presence and persona, not in terms of actually playing them. I think that's a different thing entirely, but the actual concept of them, if you take away backstory and things like that, the image of them that you're describing, then yeah, like I think it's always very effective. It's yeah, and you know, like, to use Equinox as an example, like Equinox has the one glowing yellow eye. Well, that is something that I've got a lot of mileage out because whenever he gets angry, like I can say the eye flares, or if he's feeling triumphant, you know, like there are just things that I can describe about him that people get. Like, if I were to say that, you know, and I did a stream a little while back, like about color association in role-playing games, and about if you have the villain and the villainous faction or whatever with red, the moment you say, oh, there's a red flag flying over the castle, then immediately they get it. Like, it's just little shortcuts in people's brains to allow you to become a more efficient storyteller. And I think the same can be done with villains in terms of their gimmicks. Immortan Joe with that mask, you know, is another good one because, again, it's the mask, but it's like built into him. So, like, and it's pretty disgusting, and you can see sort of like liquid like leaking from it and stuff. So that's like a really grotesque, cool example to sort of describe to your players. And a villain called Lashback, who was an ex-slave, an orc that had his toes cut off from a previous escape attempt. So now he walks about the lands of Scania in the Nine Kingdoms with these massive metal leg braces which now make him much taller, much more frightening. And like he instantly has like a thing like, oh my god, look at that orc, like he's massive and he's got these massive metal things like attached to his legs, like he just looks terrifying. It's just like one thing like that, and already Lashback is no longer just another orc for players to fight. Like you can argue one of the most generic monster types of D&D has become something that stands out just because he's got a physical defect of some kind that he is now having to sort of rely on these metal things for. And also gives him a sense of vulnerability, even though how big and powerful he is. Like there is something, you know, like, oh man, something to not relate to, but to empathize with. And I think it's just a great thing to do. And I think it's really easy. So what I'm going to say in the chat in a moment, I'm going to read some comments, and then we're going to make a villain. I think we're going to do it together, guys. For those of you interested. Okay. Brian Scott Belly says, so do I find it is missing in these games. Several. About masks, I'm guessing is what you're saying. Jeff says, I've had villains in my games that have had masks, but I'm not sure if I've had a PC with a mask. It's really fun. Brian Scott Bailey says, had a character in D&D game and he had a mask sealed to his face magically as a punishment. Yeah, Man in the Iron Mask style, like it actually being fused on. That's another good idea, isn't it? Jeff Doty says, actually, I'm mistaken. My PC for Lloyd's Crazy Level 18th Red Wizard game had a mask, though for a one-shot it's hard to pull off well, as basically all the party and enemies already knew who he was from before the game. I've never had a PC start with a mask where their identity was unknown. Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, I mean, Fade, the assassin I was talking about, like people, like he just went by Fade. Like it wasn't even a thing about his identity by the end. That was just him by the end. And he was wearing the mask for that sense of detachment rather than concealing his identity by that stage. He had gone beyond that, which I thought was pretty fun to explore. Jeff says, I'm blanking on examples, but identifiable brands tattoos is another gimmick. I see a lot of that can be cool. Yeah, really cool. Like a metal hand, for example. Like I'm focusing on like usually it's either eyes or hands, isn't it? Jaws from Bond, who's got his like razor. In fact, James Bond's quite a good one. Like Man with a Golden Gun, he's got a golden gun. Jaws with his metal teeth. Odd Job with his razor brim hat. You know. Even if it's just like a particular weapon that they use, I think is quite a good one. So what I'm going to ask is, I'm going to ask the chat to give me a body part or a weapon of some type, whatever you want to be the focus of the gimmick, and then we're going to make that gimmick into a villainous property. Let's do it. I'm going to have a sip of tea, and I shall wait to see what you want us to do, and we will make one. That hit the spot. Also, it scratches my itch for villain making because I don't have much call to do it lately because of all the campaigns that I run. I already have an established villain, so I don't need to make them because I've already made them. Jeff says, I'll go with torso. It's something you don't see much. Okay. That's quite interesting. Would you mind giving me a fantasy race as well, please? We'll go with torso because that sounds like a challenge. A fantasy race as well. What race is he? Don't say gnome or halfling. I'm not kidding. Brian, I'm not doing gnome. Gnome is off the table. Gnomes and halflings can just drown, and they're more likely to, for obvious reasons. Come on, I need a race. Elf. Okay, elf. So their torso. Okay. Well, You see, the first thing that my mind jumps to is disfiguration of some type. Now, that's obviously a lot harder for you to do with a torso because obviously there's quite a lot of vital organs in there. But what about an elf that was what about like as part of a nature-based magic, like he essentially had the ability to do bark skin and things like that, where like his flesh would become part of nature, and that was like his power. Perhaps he was some kind of forest saint that guarded like a particular grove or something. But then something happened to him where that magic became corrupt. So now, like all of his torso down here looks like sort of rotted bark, like he's a rotting, festering tree. And it's almost like a tree hollow, and you can see sort of like a nature spirit sort of hanging there where his heart would be. There we go. How cool is that? Like he's got this ethereal, corrupting light in the center of this hollowed out thing. Like it looks like he's like made of wood from about here, and you can see like it's spreading up his body. So like you can have like roots and tendrils going up his neck. Oh, that would be cool. See, there you go. Instantly, you have an identifiable villain that you won't forget in a hurry. Like you wouldn't forget that in a hurry, would you? So I don't think of names on the streams because names take a while. But yeah, that's just like an example. That was really quick. Let's do another one. Race and body part. And I'm going with physical gimmicks. Like, feel free to choose a weapon if you'd rather. I might do this again, actually. I might get Lloyd on a stream with me, and we'll do this again, and we'll actually generate some villains. Because we did the same thing a little while ago. We made an Iskloft villain, where the dude had reached into the tree that I always forget the name of. The enchanted tree from Norse mythology, and he basically pulled a root out, and it basically withered his hand, and he was called Black Hand. But he claims that's how it happened anyway, like because obviously it's cloth, like so you don't fully know if he's bullshitting or if he is actually magic. But he scares people with the fact that he's like, I have the power of the gods. What are you going to do? And he has this withered black hand to show for it, and this branch of this ancient bleached tree that he carries around with him. Like even that alone, like, is enough. An Azamar with a weapon of some sort. Okay, we'll pick the weapon. Someone pick a weapon. Azamar. Okay, plain touched, angel touched, whatever. The weapon can't be angelic and holy. Okay, we'll just pick the kind of weapon it is and then we'll go for it. I know what I'd pick, but I'm not going to say. I want someone else to choose. A spear. Okay, a spear. Azamar with a non-angelic spear. Okay. So he's a villain, but it doesn't necessarily mean to say that he's been corrupted in any way. So what if instead the Azamar perceives the PCs to be of base stock? They are impure, they are chaotic, and this is a bastion of law keeping. Not a lawkeeper, but like keeping the law, the status quo. And let me see. The spear. How do we make the spear the thing that stands out for him? So what if the spear was... This is interesting because now I'm going to draw a blank, aren't I? The spear. What could the spear be used if it's not an angelic spear? Feel free to say in the comments as well, like if you've got a good idea. Let me think. because I'm trying to avoid using the tree root example that was the Isclough one. That's all that's in my mind at the moment. Is that it was from a tree, and also we used a tree for the elf, so it can't be a tree again. Okay, what if? Okay, so this individual, he is a believer in law, and he basically, this is his gimmick as a villain. He has a spear, and it's actually one of those cool double-sided spears that you see in 3.5 Player's Handbook, where there's like a blade on each end. And what he does is that when he arrives to take out people that he believes to be heretical in his mind, he holds out his spear like that, so it's balanced. Okay, and what he does is that he allows the spear is kind of like a scale to tell him whether or not he should execute the person he's facing, and the spear has some kind of magic involved that it can detect the kind of person that it's about to slay. So you could argue that this Aasimar is actually following the whim of this weapon, because perhaps this Aasimar has been stranded on the material plane. He used to belong in a different one, and now he's here, and believes that he's carrying out some divine right, whether he's correct or not. And he puts people down with a spear depending on which way it balances. What about that? That's pretty cool, I think. Like, the spear of balance. I'd obviously find like a better name for it. But you see what I mean? That's exactly what I mean. Is that you just need like just a tiny thing to set you off, and then already you've got quite a compelling idea. And obviously, I'm not saying that this accounts for everything. This doesn't account for exactly the villain's personality, although that one kind of does a little bit. But it is something that players will latch onto, you know, and they will latch onto that much more quickly than you sort of just spouting like what this villain is saying or doing and stuff. If you just give them a really strong image to imagine, then most of the work's already done for you. And you can then consider, like, you know, the motivations of such an individual. And, you know, I think that's an important thing to consider. And it's the way that I like to come up with cool things for villains anyway. In fact, I might use that spear idea. Because I quite like it. I quite like the idea. Maybe I would change it so it isn't a spear. Maybe like a double-headed scythe or something. Or, I don't know. No, scythes are overused. Everyone uses scythes. They don't. Not since they took them out of 5th edition. Or rather didn't include them in 5th edition in the first place, if I recall anyway. But yeah, like it's simply just like thinking, okay, well, like what differentiates them from like the hordes of things that, you know, players are going to face like on the regular, you know. And there's no harm in like not giving them any kind of like thing like that at all. Like, this is just a suggestion. Like, it doesn't apply to every single villain type there is. Like, this is more outlandish kind of things that I've obviously gone like heavily steeped in fantasy. Like, obviously, if you want like a Tywin Lannister like villain that is kind of a bit of a pen pusher that sort of just writes to people and wins through diplomacy and with money, then obviously they're not. But then that in itself is their gimmick, isn't it? Like, it's their thing. It's the thing that you remember them for, is that this individual can win a war just with a stroke of his quill, you know? Like, Jeff says, dude, yes, I dig it. Arbitrary, random decision-making factors for villains are pretty cool gimmick. Let the fates, the gods decide, etc. Yeah, I guess it's a bit Two-Face, isn't it? It's a bit like Two-Face from Batman, like him leaving it on like the whim of a coin flip. But, you know, with the fates and the gods like linked in, it's not exactly the same. It's kind of like that. And then Jeff says, or if you did want to keep the spear, if it falls towards the pointed end, he kills him. If it falls on the blunt side, he doesn't. Also, that's really good, Jeff. That's really good. I really like that. Now, you can argue that it would be imbalanced because a spear, you know, would obviously be weighted at the front because of the blade. Although if it was like a more javelin-esque spear that has like the weight behind it, so when you throw it, like it goes further, then I don't know, you could work those things out, I suppose. But I like that. I like the blunt end, meaning that he's not going to kill you. That's pretty cool. I like that. I like that an awful lot. There you go. That's just my examples, and that's some of the ways that I like to create villains. It isn't the only way that I create villains, but it's a way that I can think of them quickly. And it's a way that you can make them memorable for your players. And, you know, if worse comes to worse, just slap a mask on them. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed that. So thank you ever so much for you guys who watched. I'm going to head out. Oh, sorry. Steffi says the spear hovers when it does its scale thing. Maybe it does. Maybe it does. Maybe it hovers just above his hand. Yeah, interesting. Because you want to get the, you want to give the impression like maybe he might influence it and not tell people, and isn't exactly devoted to balance as before. Or maybe he is at the beginning, but his sort of developmental arc shows that actually he starts ignoring it and just starts just killing people because he's just nuts. I like this Asimar character, and I don't really like Asimars, but like I like this one. No, that's a lie. I do quite like them, but they need to be special and rare, in my opinion. So perfect for a villain, I suppose. So anyway, like I was saying, for those of you interested, Lawkeepers, Friday in the States, Saturday, very early morning in the UK. It's going to be really good. I'm going to post the event soon. I'm going to post a thing saying this is it, this is chapter 11, blah blah blah, like I usually do, and then also Vampire on the Sunday, the Vampire Sandbox game that I'm running. Well, that was fun, guys. I really enjoyed that, and I'll be sure to do something like this again, probably on a stream. I'll get Lloyd in as well, maybe get some other people involved, like throwing more suggestions in. Torso nearly got me. That threw me a little bit. I was like, Christ. But we got there in the end. So thanks for watching, and I hope that all of your performances are up to standard.